A shocker on Shock Street, the 35th Goosebumps book in the original series, has always been an okay Goosebumps book for me. When I started reading it, I expected a book about a giant praying mantis, and I really loved the giant praying mantis in the Goosebumps film when it was in there. And, you know, the cover art for both the reprint and the original cover art shows this really cool giant praying mantis coming at you. And so I thought the book was going to center around a giant praying mantis, but it didn't. And still, the book was fine. I was slightly disappointed due to it not focusing solely on the giant praying mantis, but the plot was really cool. I loved the concept. Everything about this book was really cool. It did feel slightly rushed due to it kind of seeming like you just run from one place to another. And I think they could have made this into a special edition or a part 1, part 2, where you could explore the world a bit more, you know, explore Shock Street and see all the monsters there a whole lot more and all that. And the twist is really not that great. I mean, it's a pretty cool twist due to you not seeing it coming. But it's sort of like the twist from Welcome to Camp Nightmare. It's not exactly like that. It's different, but it feels just like that. Anyway, that's beside the point. Today, I have a theory, though, about this iconic Goosebumps book, and that is that the entire book of A Shocker on Shock Street is actually a movie. And so, anyway, guys, with this video comes spoilers for the 35th Goosebumps book in the original series, A Shocker on Shock Street. But other than that, I think that's it. I may talk about, you know, It's Alive, or Piano Lessons Can Be Murder, but I'm not going to be spoiling the story. I'm just going to be saying, like, oh, there's a robot in Piano Lessons Can Be Murder, or something like that. Anyway, guys, so that's all the spoilers we're going to be having today, so let's continue on with this theory. And so, in A Shocker on Shock Street, our main protagonists have this dad who actually is, well, not the main protagonist, only the one main protagonist. She also has a friend who kind of tags along with her throughout the story. Basically, the main protagonist's dad is a special effects guy, and he does animatronics for parks and all that stuff, amusement parks, and he also does the special effects for a film series called the Shock Street series or something like that. And so apparently the main protagonist and the main protagonist's friend are huge fans of these Shocker and Shock Street films. And actually the book kind of starts out with them at the premiere, sort of a Shock Street film, which featured a giant woolly mammoth crab. And so that's not important to the story. It's important to the theory later on, but this scene's just established, you know, that they're a big fan of the Shock Street films. Anyway, so the special effects dad is actually building a Shock Street amusement park, and he invites the main protagonist and the main protagonist's friend over to the, you know, Shock Street amusement park to test out the ride and see if it's a great Shock Street ride, since both of them are really big fans of the Shock Street series. And so they go in there, and so the first thing they encounter is a haunted house roller coaster. And then they go to this autograph area where they autograph a bunch of monsters and all that stuff. And then they go to this place called the Cave of the Living Creeps. And basically in this cave there's a bunch of worms and all that stuff. And then the tram that they're in for the ride breaks down, and they encounter a giant praying mantis. And, you know, that's the giant praying mantises and all that stuff in the Goosebumps film and the cover art. And basically, they get away from the giant praying mantises, and they then go out into the main area, which is Shock Street. It's just this whole street with a bunch of monsters. They encounter a bunch of different, you know, evil beings, like werewolves and all that stuff. And eventually as the book draws to an end, it is revealed that both the main protagonist and the main protagonist's friend are actually robots to test the amusement park to see if it is a, you know, safe ride. And obviously it isn't, due to them nearly killed by werewolves and all that stuff. And so that's pretty much how the book ends. And again, I never really liked that twist. It really shocked me when it happened and all that stuff. And so anyways, that's pretty much Shocker on Shock Street. And it seems like, just looking at the story, that the entire book of Shocker on Shock Street seems to take place, you know, in the main Goosebumps universe. I mean, after all, they gave the explanation for all that's going on. It's an amusement park, it's under testing. That explains how come all the, you know, animatronics and all that stuff are going really crazy. And all of that. But I have some evidence to actually disprove this statement. And actually, I would say that I can prove that A Shocker on Shock Street is actually all a movie. The entire book is all a movie that people can watch in theaters and all of that. And the first bit of evidence I actually do have is sort of evidence to disprove that whole amusement park testing thing, and that is how unsafe it is. I know the amusement park is under testing, but these robots are most likely thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars, and they didn't even bother putting seatbelts in an area with a roller coaster. And, I mean, fine, you're in testing, but these guys are robots. If they break, they're probably irreplaceable, just judging from the budget that they will have to function in. And not only that, but it's not that safe when you have a giant praying mantis spewing out, black goo all over everyone and making them stick. I mean, again, these robots are worth thousands of dollars. And, you're basically putting them at risk of being damaged and most likely not being able to be replaced. And also, not only that, but it is kind of strange that they would allow anything to malfunction in the ride. Again, like the giant praying mantises. And also there's the budget. I mean, how much are they paying these people to make the Shock Street films? Or, the Shock Street amusement park? I don't really know about how successful these Shock Street films are. Fine, they've made 6 of them. But they're functioning at a huge budget here that you don't even really see at Horrorland, honestly. And you can see this from Giant Praying Mantis. 2 test robots, or basically dummies, who are robots that have emotions and all that stuff, which is crazy. I mean, this book takes place during the 90s. And so the fact that they have robots that, have emotions and all that stuff, and in the Goosebumps universe, the last time this ever happened was in It's Alive, It's Alive. You could say, in Piano Lessons Can Be Murder, they had one of the characters in there was a robot, but he didn't really have that much emotion to him, and he had not robot hands. He had have human hands because that was too complicated. So it's not like a, very fantastic robot in there. It's still really cool, but I mean, from the standards that you see in Shocker on Shock Street, it's not as great. And so, the fact that they have 2 test robots that are worth thousands and thousands, if not millions, worth of dollars with just these 2 robots, then you have giant praying mantises, you have werewolf people, you have zombies and all that stuff, all of which will be very expensive. And so, I highly doubt that, they would spend this much money on a Shock Street amusement park. The films would have to be really successful, and maybe they are really successful, but still, I don't think they'd spend that much money on an amusement park with technology that hasn't really been even invented yet, honestly, in the Goosebumps universe, and all of that. And there's further evidence than just that, and also there is the fact, not only with the budget, is there's a lack of monsters in the amusement park. In the Shock Street films, apparently, from what I remember of the story, I haven't read the story in a little while, but the movie that they watched, the main protagonist friend watched, at the beginning of the Shocker on Shock Street was the 6th Shock Street film, I believe. Don't quote me on that, but I highly believe that is the 6th Shock Street film. And the monsters that we see, though, in A Shocker on Shock Street do not equal the amount given that you could, basically, using math and all that stuff, guess. Because there's 6 Shock Street films. The 6th one in the series features a giant woolly mammoth crab, and that's it. No other extra monsters or anything like that. And so that would mean that most likely all of the other ones in the Shock Street films are all, have 1 or 2 monsters in them. But just look at this. In the ride, they have the haunted house. That would take, 1 Shock Street film. Then you have that autograph area where multiple Shock Street monsters are. I can't remember all of them, and so I can't really tell you, but there's a bunch of Shock Street monsters in there, not to mention the 2 werewolves that they found, a graveyard, and the giant praying mantises, and they didn't even include the woolly mammoth crab from the Shocker on Shock Street 6. And so that would mean they would have 5 films worth of monsters in this entire amusement park. And you could say some of them are for future films or all that stuff, but still, there are still so many monsters in the Shock Street films that either they just shoved a bunch of Shock Street monsters in multiple films, or, it could be something else. Like the Shock Street films that they're talking about are fake, and the entire book itself is a movie. And, the Shock Street films with Shock Street 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 never actually happened. And that's just in the fictional universe of the film A Shocker on Shock Street. And there's evidence to prove this due to there being multiple Goosebumps characters throughout the Goosebumps series who are horror movie fanatics, never actually talking about A Shocker on Shock Street. Apparently, if they're building an amusement park, the Shocker on Shock Street films, Shocker on Shock Street films, would be really popular due to them being 6. They're going to build an amusement park. They have to be really popular. And we have horror movie fanatics throughout the Goosebumps franchise, and not a single one mentions Shock Street or any of the Shock Street films. And so this leads me to believe that the only explanation for this theory is that it is a movie. And that would explain how the budget thing, they could just make it, animatronics only scripted to do that one certain thing that they're supposed to do in the film, or they could have just done CGI or something like that. Also, that would explain, again, the budget. That would explain some of the safety things, and it would also explain how they don't have technology that won't even be invented yet until the modern day in the Goosebumps universe with It's Alive, and all of that stuff. So it will explain the technology problems, it will explain the budget problems, and it will explain the safety problems and all that stuff due to it being a film, and so it's fine with the film and all of that stuff. And so, overall, I think that is a lot of evidence to disprove that whole amusement park thing. That's all under testing. And a lot of evidence to prove that this was all actually a film, because it will explain all of those difficulties and stuff like that I was talking about before. And even in Goosebumps Horror Town, we do have the drive-in theater there in the video game. And guess what's playing on the film but A Shocker on Shock Street, except it's the cover art from the 35th Goosebumps book. And you could say that maybe the Shocker on Shock Street praying mantises got their own film and all that stuff due to the main protagonist not recognizing him in the film, so maybe it's a future film. But I'm not really sure about that. And maybe, just looking at the cover art, for Shocker on Shock Street, the giant praying mantis seems to be sort of metallic. You can see it kind of glimmer in the sunlight and all that stuff. And so that seems to mean that this giant praying mantis is metallic. It's even gray and all of that stuff. And the giant praying mantis that you would see in a Shock Street film, because supposedly the Shock Street films are supposed to have very realistic effects and all that stuff. And so if they're doing a giant praying mantis, then they probably won't make it look metal-like and more, lifelike and all that stuff due to them being known for their lifelike special effects, as said in the book itself. And so that would mean that the film playing in that drive-in theater would not be a solo film for the Shock Street series, for the giant praying mantises, but actually it would be A Shocker on Shock Street, the book itself. You might say, though, that there is evidence to disprove this with the Goosebumps film due to the giant praying mantis in the Goosebumps film, first off, being very lifelike, and also, it, sort of was unscripted. It wasn't a movie thing. It was real. It was attacking cars, crushing cars, and all that stuff, and that is true. But I think it's sort of a case like Invaders from the Big Screen, in which a giant monster, breaks through the screen and then comes into the real world, sort of like that, and all of that stuff. And I don't really honestly think that the one from the Goosebumps film would be from the real Shock Street anyways, from the Shock Street that we get in the story, due to the giant praying mantis, having unscripted movements. It's not just, it's flying, and they can't obviously afford that. Again, they have, really high budget if they can afford that in Shock Street. So I think, overall, it's sort of like a case from Invaders from the big screen. And also, one more piece of evidence that I forgot to mention was that also in Goosebumps the game, not the board game, but the video game, in that game, they actually had a movie theater, and one of those movies in there was not a Shocker on Shock Street or any Shock Street film. Instead, they have the Lizard Man 2 from Dr. Horror's House of Horror video. And so, that, I think, is a lot of evidence to prove that the Shock Street films do not exist in the Goosebumps universe. And actually, and because, the Shock Street films, again, are super popular horror films. Lizard Man 2 from Dr. Horror's House of Horror video, I'm not going to get into too much detail on that. But that is a smaller film. I mean, I think, Dr. Horror lives in, basically a video store, sort of. And the fact that he can get that film in theaters and all that stuff when his story's released from the book in Goosebumps the game, then how come there wasn't a Shock Street film in there? Supposedly, these films are more popular than probably a Lizard Man 2 due to the main protagonist in Dr. Horror's House of Horror video being a horror movie fanatic and all of that stuff. And he didn't even know about Lizard Man 2. And anyway, guys, comment down below what you guys think about this theory. I'm sorry about how abrupt that was, but that's the end of my video, guys. Comment down below what you think about this theory. Do you think Shock Street takes place in a movie? The entire book is a movie. Or do you think it just takes place in the normal Goosebumps universe with all those futuristic robots and all that? Comment down below. And thanks so much for watching, and that is the end of my video.